Again. Yes, good. One more hand for Ken. This is, I don't necessarily expect to learn at events like this, but I brought my laptop in case the problems plague me that occurred with others. I did want to bring it back to somewhat more practical next year considerations. This is not a working session per se. Yes, it's a keynote, but we are here today talking about, well, cars. I want to give a frame of reference. OpenCar is a company that started recently, about 2011, to pursue the development of an application framework, even though we're a private company, to do so in sort of an open way. We saw that the automotive industry has a bit of a problem getting things done because there is no standardization of the platforms. The automakers, the tier 1 suppliers, the third-party application developers, the tier 2s, and the sort of individual contributors to a project have no way of coordinating all of the pieces of a project. And yet, automakers need to sort of step up and catch up with consumer expectations. They need to be more efficient in their development. So, why talk about cars? Well, I understand about 10% of this audience, actually by show of hands, how many automaker representatives, how many of you work with automakers? Yeah, okay, we're coming in at about, I would say 7.2% or so. You can go back to your tweets. This is really for the rest of you. The rest of you who will, a large majority of whom will inevitably at some point over the next 20 years or so, be involved in the creation of some valuable new asset for automotive. So, even though OpenCar is based on HTML5, we are now moving into Qt. We had to do the first thing first. It's an increasingly important technology in automotive, and so let's talk about that. We're going to take a look at the global auto industry itself first. This is a bit of an eye chart. Being an HTML5 guy, our graphics are not as pretty as most of the Qt presenters, I'm afraid. We'll just acknowledge this. We're platform guys. There are some huge, well, this is a huge industry. This is an eye chart that describes some of the relationships, perhaps a month or two old, and so I'm sure it's out of date at this point because this changes. These are just the automakers themselves and the relationships that they have to one another. This is a 2 trillion euro industry. 3% of global GDP automakers account for. And this does not include the suppliers. The suppliers are many, many, many times. This slide would be entirely black if you included the suppliers. So if you think about the size of the industry, 2 trillion euros. And the fact that emerging economies like China and India, it's perhaps 6–7% of the GDP. Well, a lot is happening right now. It matters to a lot of people that this be done right. And about 1/3 of the bill of materials going into the creation of a car today is software-defined systems. Not just the million lines of code describing the ECUs, but software-defined dynamic systems, representing a fairly significant opportunity for this audience. Big numbers like 2 trillion are responsible for the emergence of the steel industry, the importance of that industry. And it's now pivoting to software. So looking at the business first, before we get into the technology. What really sells cars? You have to step back a little bit and think about what it takes to compete as an automaker. Every marketing organization knows that you have to appeal to the basic psychological needs if you're creating a new product. And a car is an important product. It's the most expensive thing that most people own. Most people don't own their own home. And these are the basic psychological factors that drive the sales of vehicles. It's the freedom of the open road, just adventure, a sense of freedom and irresponsibility, and the blowing autumn leaves, and power and independence. And this is what has sold cars for the last 20 years or so. And this works. It works. But now we're moving into the consumer electronics-driven age. And automakers think about their product in very tangible terms. What do we need? What's the checklist? What do we need to make sure that we get right in order to ensure that we're competitive? Well, we have a much more concise word cloud. These are the tangible features that the heavy manufacturing discipline has pursued. Obviously, it has to look good, has to perform well. We know that buyers are concerned with fuel economy, and in fact, regulators are even more concerned with fuel economy. Must be comfortable, reliable, has to have a good warranty period, an adequate trunk space and back seat space. Interesting set of criteria to try to differentiate your product with. But again, this goes back to the heavy manufacturing discipline that has defined this entire industry for the last century. So I actually went through this exercise a few months ago. My wife is talking about getting yet another new car. 25 to 40,000 euro. Let's go take a look around. Just imagine we don't have brand biases. I do have brand biases, but I don't want to represent this to my wife this way. Let's go to cars.com and plug in just a few criteria. I want a certain gas mileage. I want to not spend too much. And I want to be able to make a decision without test driving every vehicle on the planet. And it gives me 175 results of different models and trim lines that I should probably consider in my purchase. My purchase criteria is based on fuel economy, reliability, warranty period, etc. How do I start looking? How do I make a decision if I don't have affinity for a particular brand? And every automaker wants to make you their customer. They only make money every 5 years or so when you go back to the showroom. Parts don't really generate money for automakers. That's for the dealers. So they want to move this packaged product off the showroom floor and check off that spreadsheet, that ticker that says, here's one more that we sold this minute on Earth. It's a mature industry, and that is evidenced by the fact that the differences are almost indiscernible at this point to new buyers. And marketing organizations, as a result, have a huge challenge ahead of them. So we have seen over the last few years a move from the outside of the car, that freedom machine, to the inside of the car. The car is becoming more of a power center. It's an independence machine. You're alone and in control of your own life. This is the way that the marketers have changed their focus. They understand, of course, still that it's necessary in order to sell a car, to move a car off the showroom floor, that you have to stop talking about trunk space and power and reliability, and you have to get the driver behind the wheel. You have to make that love connection with the car. Because really, the final buying decision on a big expensive item like this, it doesn't happen here. This is a checklist. We think that we make decisions here. We make decisions here. And that doesn't happen until you actually get in the car and you have an emotional connection with the car. So get the customer behind the wheel and create their new sense of a unified, empowering experience. So at this point, we can begin to see where this is going. We're going to consider for a moment the design of various vehicles and some of the problems that automakers are up against as they move into these software-defined systems inside the car by looking at 3 different cars. Here's 3 different customer segments that they're going after. The truck driver, of course, is a very specific customer segment. Manly man. Very interested in probably touchscreen interaction model, maybe voice backup. The applications, the functionality, the features that they want to have on this vehicle. Because he's going to be towing a boat, he wants to make sure he has a tow minder so he doesn't overload his engine. The design on the screen is probably angular. Look at the design of the interior of the cabin. Again, the auto industry has been designing these cabin interiors for a century, and it matches. It's a very cohesive experience until you get to the electronic defined systems, and the auto industry is scrambling to catch up and make sure that they can do that as well. They know there's a void. It's just not quite right yet. Sports car driver probably wants steering wheel and voice functions, apps that warn about traffic cameras and speed traps, maybe school zones if they're a responsible grown-up. Visual is swoochy and somewhat angular, looks aerodynamic. Fun car is a little bit more playful with applications that value carpooling, entertainment. Maybe an HMI, a visual style that echoes the cabin interior and the overall nature of the car again. But this is hard. This is hard because, again, if we're trying to move to a more efficient system for creating software, these are not smartphones. The interactivity model is very different than a smartphone. It's a very different new category of device. And the numbers for each of the per unit numbers of these vehicles is not huge. It's not really adequate to justify heroics in creating custom interfaces 3 years at a time for one particular model of vehicle. Not historically, at least. Now here's another factor. These are connected devices. By 2020, we're going to have about 250 million connected vehicles. And we're talking 3G, 4G connectivity, primarily 4G. Over 90% of the vehicles produced in 2020 will have connectivity. So this is a new category of connected device. And everyone in this room, and everyone at the shopping mall, and everyone driving down the street, all of your relatives, understand the characteristics of connected devices now. 25% of the planet's population has a smartphone, Android, iOS, smartphone, 20% Android. So we all know how smart connected devices work. They automatically update, they keep track of our personal data, their personal devices. And consumers are suddenly surrounded by these devices. We're learning the common characteristics, and we're seeing more and more of these devices. These are just sort of a quick swath of various IoT devices that update themselves. There are good-selling devices in each of these categories that, when the manufacturer learns a better way to control a light bulb, they have an update package over the air. So these are the common characteristics that automakers need to begin to really embrace in order to meet customer expectations. There's another problem. Automakers have been producing a product for some years that it's a durable good, not unlike a washer or dryer. And there's a value decay curve that's fairly predictable if you look at big numbers. And you get down to about 35–40% or so appreciation, and this is a psychological appreciation. This is not a cost value decay. That's about the time that people typically swap out of a car and get into another car. We know that the value decay curve for software, and don't take this curve too literally, this is a study from a UX firm that I work with. It's much more aggressive. So when you install new software, like we do on our phones, when you install new software and it works fine for a little while, at some point we are less and less enamored with it, simply because we expect a new feature to be added, or a facelift, a visual facelift to show up. And if that expectation is not met, we eventually move on to other applications. And so many application developers know this. Creating software is more like writing for a newspaper. You turn the crank and you create value every day. Making a car is more like writing a book. You work really hard and you get to rest in between versions of your vehicle, at least a little bit. So we have this overrun of font. Like I said, I'm an HTML guy. We have a new device category, and we have an industry in flux. And automakers are beginning to understand now that software developers and a software creation discipline and tooling are part of their future. The software creation discipline, by the way, is one wherein you accept that software will have bugs until the very end. It's not waterfall. Continuous improvement, over-the-air updates, and monitoring and analytics are part of the future as well. So now we jump into the practical aspect here. As developers, preparing, the vast majority of you, preparing to enter the auto industry, I'm going to assume. Here's a few places to start. Understand the safety requirements. I underrated this when I got into this. Went to conferences and learned that everyone was safety, 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 and they just didn't want to move on to what they actually wanted to do. They were so hung up on safety. Now I understand. I've been at this for a while and appreciate the need for this. Autonomous is not going to save us. Familiarize yourself, please, with these 600 pages of documents from various entities. Understand that your drivers won't be able to watch video. There are very specific font and color and contrast requirements, etc. We've done all that we can to turn this into bite-sized pieces, candy-sized pieces of information on our site. I can share this URL with you after the event. And recognize also that there exists an interesting opportunity in this unique new device category based on ECUs, on the sensors, controllers, and actuators that are connected through the CAN network. The first car that we worked on had about 3,000 or so variables. I could look at wheel spin indication, steering wheel angle indication, exact brake pressure applied when someone was approaching a particular area that caused their shock throw indicator to extend. So we know not only that there's a pothole at that GPS location, but we know the rough dimensions and visibility of that pothole, particularly when the second and the third driver hit it. And that's not a terribly imaginative application. Thousands of variables still being extended. There is a group within the W3C that is working to pull together sort of a standardized starter set, about 240 variables or so. And by late 2016, should all go well, this will actually be ratified and relevant. There's so much to say here, but as I understand, I'm out of time. I just wanted to say a couple of opportunities that we have for integrating the smartphone with the car. There should be a video on this, but we're cutting it short. We need to think about, is the car an accessory to the phone, or is the phone an accessory to the car, or are they peers? Is this personal device that leaves the car with us, is that its own device category? And again, we'll pop through this. How do we want to mash up data from various content sources so that we present a more cohesive and valuable experience? As content providers, do we have to, or do we want to sort of give up a bit of our brand so that we can create something that's just far more valuable? What does the overall interactivity model look like from each of the manufacturers? And with that, there's a session this afternoon. We can dive a little bit deeper, but I will turn it over to the next speaker.